fine.
Good? All right. Thanks. No mic.
It's available if anybody wants it.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you everyone for coming to the reading. This is the FarmerCon portion of the New Fictioneers reading. FarmerCon has been held in conjunction with PulpFest for the past 5 years. And so we're really happy to be a part of it and continue to be a part of the PulpFest family. This year, Chuck Welch kindly arranged for 3 of us who have collaborated with Philip José Farmer or co-written works with Philip José Farmer in the past, offered us the opportunity to do a New Fictioneers reading in a block, kind of all together. So a little bit of a theme there. So thank you for that, Chuck. Really appreciate that. This year, we're going to have Danny Adams reading. We're going to have Christopher Paul Carey reading, and then I'm going to do a reading. My name is Win Eckert, or my byline is Win Scott Eckert. First of all, Danny, a little bit of background. Danny is Philip José Farmer's nephew, or great-nephew, or great-nephew. And so he had an opportunity to grow up sort of in the aura of Phil.
Which I can talk about at the panel if anybody's interested.
Absolutely. So we will be discussing some of our experiences in co-writing with Philip José Farmer tonight on tonight's panel at 7 p.m. So we hope you'll all be able to join us for that. Appreciate it. I'm sure that that Danny and Chris and myself will leave a little bit of time for questions here also after our reading. So initially, I'm going to just do a little bit of a blurb on what the guys are reading from, and then I'm going to turn it over to them and let them get started. So Danny's latest book is co-written with Philip José Farmer from both text that Phil wrote as well as notes to complete the book. It's a new book in the Dayworld series, and so this will actually be the 4th book in the series, although it serves as a prelude or a prequel to the original trilogy. I'll just read from the blurb, okay? So I'll set that up. Dayworld was born from the overpopulation and chaos of the late 21st century, live just 1 day out of 7, spend the rest in suspended animation called stoning, and humanity will only need 1/7 of the resources it was consuming on its dying planet. Now, 3.5 centuries into this new era, or 2 subjunctive generations later, everyone seems blessed with peace and abundance, but one man is about to discover that the seeds of the world's destruction were deeply planted before the day world even dawned. Right? So Danny will come and read from that. By the way, this is available at the Meteor House table upstairs if you're interested, both in hardcover and softcover, whatever your pleasure is. Christopher Paul Carey is going to be reading from the latest Opar book. This is Blood of Ancient Opar. This is a follow-on from the original Ancient Opar trilogy, which was Hadon of Ancient Opar and Flight to Opar, which you may be remembering from the Daw paperbacks in the 1970s and reprints in the 80s. Chris then finished the 3rd book in the series, The Song of Kwasin, and that was published several years ago in an omnibus edition from Subterranean Press, and then reissued as a standalone edition by Meteor House last year. He then wrote the 4th book in the series, Hadon, King of Opar, which debuted at last year's PulpFest, and this is the 5th book in the series, Blood of Ancient Opar, debuting this year at PulpFest, again available up at the Meteor House table in glorious hardcover or softcover. So I'm going to actually do the introduction for my own reading later. When I come up, I'll go 3rd. So I'm going to introduce Danny Adams. Please give him a hand. Danny, you can sit up here or make it a little bit more intimate if you want to sit down here, whatever your pleasure is.
I think I'll probably end up moving around too much.
Okay.
To sit.
Do you want the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I don't have anything to add to Win's introduction of me, except this is my first PulpFest and my first FarmerCon since it was held in Peoria, Illinois. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having PulpFest for that matter. To give you a quick rundown of what happens up to the point where I'm going to be reading, the main character, the hero, though he would not think of himself as such, is named Jerry Carson, who, unlike the hero of the original trilogy, is perfectly happy to be whatever the Dayworld wants him to be. He just wants to be left alone. He likes to teach. He likes to read books. He doesn't have any interest in overturning any system. especially since he is a history professor. He knows what things were like beforehand, especially in the dark days leading up to the Dayworld, until circumstances force his hand in that he has discovered that his wife's stoner timer is releasing her late every morning, just a minute, then 5 minutes, and he can't figure out why. And to summarize, his investigation into this drops him into the clutches of a fellow named Dr. Northpath Marks, who is the head of New York City Dome's Bureau of Psychic Rehabilitation, but he is also the one who has helped plant the seeds to destroy the Dayworld, not in an overturning way that the characters of the original trilogy wanted to do it, but by essentially obliterating everything, including the technology, starting over in a primitive world where only the strong survive. He also manages at one point to escape from Marx's clutches and is racing back and forth through this building, trying to figure out how to escape, how to protect his wife, because Marx knows about her. When he finds a stoner room, which is odd in the fact that all the stoners don't look anything like any of the stoners that he is used to, which are just these 8-foot cylinders, if you're not familiar with the series, but are experimental shapes, experimental sizes. And then as he is fascinatedly walking around looking at these things, he hears a voice in his head say, "Well done, Mr. Carson. You have led Galapagos," which is the name of the company, or the underground organization that Northpath Marks runs, "on an excellent chase, but now it is time to return to Marks and surrender." Jerry felt caught in a three-way trap. Behind him, the old stoners, if they were old, rather than some bizarre new experiments. Before him, the door leading back out to where an unknown number of authorities were hunting him. And then that voice from all around him, though in the dim room Jerry saw no evidence of speakers or any kind of computer or other terminal capable of producing sound. "Where are you?" Jerry asked the air. The voice chuckled. "Directly ahead of you, I hope." "Who are you, the shadow?" As he asked, Jerry walked around the room again seeking a weapon, and finding nothing he could fabricate in short order, he increasingly felt that hiding was useless. There was nothing present to hide in but the cylinders and other shaped stoners, but he couldn't take the chance of any of them being active, or if they were, they're functioning properly. One small mistake in the field could be catastrophic, something Jerry was forcing himself to consider after a lifetime of conditioning that no such problem could ever occur with stoners. "I've tracked your progress in escaping from Galapagos," the all-surrounding voice told him, "and I find it impressive, particularly the simplicity of using fluid to negate the kill frequency. Galapagos had taken measures against some more technological jamming, but obviously never considered something so basic. Ironic, really, considering their stated goals of breaking away from technology." "I won't join you," Jerry made himself say. There, it was out. "Stone me if you must. There may be problems with this world, as you say, but nothing so wrong we have to destroy everything we've built." "I have no intention of destroying this world, Mr. Carson," the voice told him. "I am not with Galapagos, but part of an organization nearly as old as they are, and dedicated to destroying them. Likewise, we oppose the ever-increasing invasive surveillance of our so-called organic government through the stoners and other means. But Galapagos has, as I'm certain you've guessed, infiltrated every level of society. They have been at it since the beginning of the new era, and before, when it was clear which way the winds were blowing. They have the advantage of being skilled at daybreaking, as you have also no doubt witnessed by now. If you're opposed to them, then help me escape them." "Mr. Carson, let me spread out the facts as they exist at this moment so you'll know where you stand or fall. By your first night in Galapagos' custody, they would have learned everything about you, starting with your home address and your marriage to Linda. Your home is no longer a sanctuary. Any attempt to legally leave NYC will involve processing a request that one of their people will see somewhere along the line and intercept. Any attempt to leave illicitly will be watched for by all means of surveillance, and as they are masters at altering identity, any attempt by you to alter your own would be caught immediately." Jerry deflated as if some reverse stoner field had robbed his body of all solidity. "Where are you? If you mean how are you hearing my voice, Marx had a microchip implanted within your skull as a means to monitor you at all times, primarily your emotional state, which will be broadcasting to him right now like an old air raid siren, but to an extent it may also be used as a tracking device." "Tracking? Then they know where I am." "Not precisely. First of all, when you belong to an organization that distrusts technology so thoroughly, sometimes you're bound to make mistakes with technology. The chip's primary duties are for mental and physical surveillance of a more long-term variety, by which I mean to record patterns Marx and Galapagos might find useful later. Can they use my bio readings to determine whether or not I'm lying? Possibly, but I suspect they would prefer other more invasive means like truth mist. Marx himself has a substantial ego, however, and is more likely to trust his own observations than technology. As for tracking, the chip isn't specifically meant for that purpose. Why bother when the needle in your wrist is all the guarantee of compliance they believe they need? It can be honed in like a wireless radio signal, but you are in a shielded room. For the moment, they cannot track you with any precision at all. Shielded. Jerry looked around at the strange chambers again and wondered if they might be operating after all and somehow creating an electromagnetic dampening field of some sort, or even something more destructive like the old electromagnetic pulse weapons used in the 21st century, which would explain the lack of other electronic devices in the room. What do you mean? There are security devices in the room creating a static field blocking surveillance of any kind or any unauthorized transmissions in or out. But I'm hearing you, Jerry told him. Then his stomach nodded with realization. I'm hearing you through the chip the gallows implanted. Gallows? The voice chuckled in a way that did not strike Jerry at all friendly. Gallows, by the way, was Jerry's personal nickname for Galapagos because he thought it was a lot more appropriate. Yes, it was Galapagos' chip, and our ability to hear each other means the shielding in your room was placed by Galapagos. Then they can hear us. No, another fault in their chip technology. I'm piggybacking on their signal and have attuned its vibrational frequencies to emulate my voice. I am also the one who initiated the remote code response, allowing you to open the door into the room. Jerry rubbed his eyes as if the scene of the stoners of everything that had happened to him since his baleful decision to daybreak would rub away too. When this didn't happen, he gave the door a long stare. Will you help me get away from them then? Never mind what you said about not being able to escape. I just want to get out of this building and then I'll think of something. Jerry expected to be scolded and soon decided he would have rather had a scolding than what the voice said next. The only way for you to escape, Mr. Carson, is for you to surrender to Galapagos and join them. Though the room is shielded, they did have your general location before you entered it and are searching this floor room by room. I estimate you have 10 minutes, no more, before they find you. The dimness in the room seemed to go black for a moment. Jerry had to grab the edge of the table with the chaotic stoner parts to stay standing and grabbed it hard, hurting his hand, to use the physical sensation of the table to keep himself grounded, not to mention conscious. Maybe you could explain to me how surrendering and joining them are the same thing as escaping. If you've been fighting them as long as you say, you know how insane they are and how dangerous. We are well aware of all this and more, Mr. Carson, but we have been fighting them for 3 sub-generations. They will not fall in a day or a year, and possibly even much longer if we wish to preserve the civilization we have built. Because, you see, they have infiltrated so many places that taking them all out at once would leave too many holes and the edifice would collapse. I don't understand how my joining them will do any good. We need people to fight them from inside, Mr. Carson, and fill those holes as the holes appear. You have proven your resourcefulness against many obstacles, not the least of which is yourself. Your fears and indoctrination may be substantial, but you have already demonstrated yourself proficient at overcoming them. Join Galapagos, the gallows, as you appropriately call them. Learn their training, watch who and what they moved to where, and tell us everything you can. And who are you? I know you told me you wanted to destroy Galapagos, but what do you believe, whoever you are? If you require a name, you can call me Oscar Diggs. Jerry laughed cynically. You want me to call you after a wizard whose powers were nothing but technological hokum hidden behind a curtain and smoke? Think of it as a man who proved to others that the resources they needed to fight evil were already within them. But my name is not important. Our organization believes all things in this world have core components, and anything can be destroyed or undone or built when those components are arranged the right way. Jerry decided to call the organization behind his nameless voice the Reductionists. And so, Jerry said, you spent 400 odd years trying to take apart the gallows piece by piece? If we tried that, Marx and his people would simply fill in every piece we removed. What we mean to do is rearrange and rebuild those pieces to turn Galapagos to our own ends and wreck their intentions to wreck the new era. We are particularly fond of the technology and benefits of this world and wish to see those things preserved. We ask now that you join Galapagos, and in doing so, join us. Whoever you are, your time is short, Mr. Carson. As I tracked you, I'm also tracking your pursuers. I estimate now you have no more than 5 minutes before Marx and the police locate you. Jerry felt his resolve wavering, but just as he did, he remembered another major problem and shook his head as if the voice could see him. Even if I do give myself up, Marx will know I'm not sincere about joining him the moment he puts me through the narco-hypnotic test. Then you must be sincere. To start with, we can prevent your wife from having any further miscarriages, which is something that was noted in the beginning of the book that seemed to be lining up with the stoner delays, delaying waking her up every morning. Jerry felt swelling hope in his chest in spite of himself, though that hope possessed a cold core. This is what we wanted, as the gallows well know, but it may not be enough. I have to be reasonably certain you are who you say you are. If I have any doubt that this isn't just a test by Galapagos, that doubt will surface in the testing. A pause. How much do you know about Theodora Maria Ashkenazi Carson? My grandmother, very little. She died when I was young. Do you remember her ever saying anything about evolution, survival, perhaps the Galapagos, or gallows? Jerry remembered. She used the word gallows, and she was always angry when she said it. She was a mold for us, Theodora and your grandfather both, from early on before they went into the domes and the stoners. His grandparents were first gens in the domes, Jerry remembered. Jerry knew still less about his grandfather, who died sub-years before he was born, but he did remember his grandmother never wanting to talk about the stoners or the new era, to the point where she would just leave the room altogether if she could. Theodora and I were close for a long time, the voice said, with what almost could be a trace of wistfulness, though Jerry knew if the voice had any training in psychic evaluation and rehabilitation, he would have likewise been trained in vocal and emotional manipulation to bond empathically with any subject and build an artificial connection between them. She was part of my family. I don't mean by blood, but every other way that is important. But she refused certain benefits of working for Galapagos, including their gene therapies. She could still be alive, but working for the gallows was so repugnant to her, even as a spy, she chose against it. For her, much as it grieves me to say so, it was the right choice. How will this help me pass the truth test? Jerry asked. He wondered how much of his 5 minutes had passed. Maybe there were police remarks himself right outside the apartment door, seconds away from bursting in. Even in the new era, Mr. Carson, there are few guarantees, but I can make you some promises. I will promise you Linda's genetic issues will be corrected. I can promise you that I, and you I imagine, will do everything in our power to destroy Galapagos. And I will tell you anything about your grandparents you ask of me, including their service against Galapagos, and how it led you to being where you are today. If you join us, I will give you immediate allies in our fight, but I remind you that your window of opportunity is nearly ended. Jerry let out a long breath. He could not stay trapped, no matter what the voice said he must do. Jerry was certain if he could slip out of this tightening noose, then he could figure out something to get away on the next step. And the next after that. His legs felt electrified, psyching themselves up to take the steps outside the shielded stoner room, then one foot after another back out into the corridor. Who are you? Jerry asked again, the door out seeming to approach him inexorably of its own accord. What do I call you, your organization? We call ourselves the family, for to a great extent this is what we are. By the time the voice finished, Jerry had reached the apartment's last door. He watched his hand reach to the knob, turn, pull. The walls were featureless but pulsing gently when he stepped out into the hallway, a signal meant as an alarm to residents to stay in their apartments. Take the stairs immediately to your left, the voice said. Why? Jerry said. I thought you wanted me to surrender. There is something we need you to do first. That didn't make any sense to Jerry, but if it meant a chance at escaping instead, then he would run. The corridor was empty. The residents, having seen the pulsing walls, whether outside or inside their apartments, would have locked themselves into the safety of their rooms. Down, the voice told him. Down as far as you can go. Jerry obeyed, this time hoping the order would not prove to be personal irony. So, how am I doing on time?
About another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. Well, the next passage that I will read, or the part that I will read then, is after Jerry has gone to the Galapagos training camp, which is out in the wilderness known once upon a time as the Appalachian Mountains. No technology except basic stuff that he could find anywhere in the woods, where he is learning to become the natural man, whether that means hunting, the hunting could be bears or deer, the hunting could be people, or how to do anything he needs to survive, essentially, mentally or physically. He has two tent mates in here, in this chapter, who he rather reluctantly likes very much, despite the fact that they are followers of Galapagos. When Jerry stepped into his tent that night, he nearly walked straight into air shaded dark blood red. A horned skull hovered waist high off the ground. Just beyond the Holocene, Ellie Venn sat cross-legged on her mat, wearing only a loincloth of white cotton bright against her copper gold skin. She hardly noticed Jerry enter. Her rapt attention was divided between the skull, which was facing her, and the scout in her hand. The scout is like an all-purpose artificial intelligence Kindle, essentially, that also talks. At this point, they've become trainers themselves, so they have the scouts to do anything from design training programs to keep an eye on all of their trainees. The painting is complete and rendered with a 100% level of realistic pan-level accuracy, her scout announced. It used a woman's voice, sounding halfway British and half mild, but almost bewitching Southern American. Would you like to run a molecular comparison between the original and the recreation? Ven looked at Jerry when she answered, that will not be necessary, and 3D visual and store in scout memory. The floating hollow painting disappeared. Who was that, Jerry asked. Tamara, Ven told him. It looked like a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. It is a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, down to the molecular structure of the original cow skull on red. The original in the Museum of Phoenix Dome has been scanned and is publicly available on the networks. Every iota of paint cataloged to atomic superstructure, even the arrangement of the brush stroke structure by molecular positioning. Available for anyone who wishes to recreate it. The recreation I just built was done with the Scouts Tamara program, the Trompe l'Oeil art modeling and recreation algorithm. It can recreate any artwork. The seed of an idea was germinating in the back of Jerry's brain. I should add at this point that the mysterious voice in the chip in Jerry's head is getting very, very impatient that Jerry has not stolen a computer yet from Marx, which has a bunch of information on a secret project that Marx is running to, he thinks, create super soldiers. Any artwork that has been scanned, Ven told him, which the Scout can also do, or it can take elements you have scanned, such as layered colors of a particular sunset and the texture of a newly budded leaf you find especially attractive, and create something original to you. Think of Tamara as a master painter and calligrapher. She could create beautiful artworks of her own, as many users have her do, while also, as human calligraphers do for the day's political and business executives, replicating official signatures on invitations and cards. May I have a copy of the program, Jerry asked. The seed had just broken the soil with its first shoot, though. That bit of green was only tiny so far. You never struck me as an artistic type, she said. Then you'll need to open your Scout's permission for a share specific to my device. Jerry entered his passcode on the visual display and then let it scan his wrist for bioverification. I've discovered a great many things about myself while we've been in this camp, he said truthfully. Things I never would have considered important or thought myself capable of. There was a flash of wariness in her eyes. Jerry recognized it. It was the same one she and Von Werden, his other tent mate, turned on him when Immerman announced that he had ferreted out Graham as the hound. But then something softened. She stretched out her hand and Jerry placed his Scout in it. The wireless upload to Jerry's Scout only took a moment, and then she handed the Scout back. Jerry retreated to his own mat, though retreat was a bit of a misnomer since the mat was only 5 feet away from Ven's, to study the program. Von Worden entered the tent as Jerry began, but no one said anything to the other. They had a mutually beneficial arrangement similar to the kinds necessary in a 12er, where so many people packed together in one space. All three-way interaction was by unanimous agreement. Otherwise, 2 would take themselves outside, or all 3 tent mates embarked on their own actions individually and quietly. Van Worden had obviously been out running with a pack again, his favorite free time activity. He came in smelling of water, but not soap, which was still considered a luxury in Camp Natufield. While Jerry and Ven worked with their Scouts, Van Worden tested his reflexes by using 2 fingers to catch any fleas that sprung off his skin. He shredded them between sharp fingernails. Jerry correlated Tamara's programming with the Scouts and found that they were mutually compatible. Not a surprise, since Stoneburner was the standard programming language used in the Scouts and across many of the world's networks. It could be as simple or as complex as necessary, and artificial intelligence was built into the program, coding itself, which took the measure of its user, placing the user on a scale ranging roughly from complete neophyte to preternatural computing genius. Then it offered up its programming structures and logic accordingly, combining the user's desire with their programming and item generation skill level. Jerry had been a complete neophyte when Immerman first handed him a Scout, but the device's logic was built with inherent patterns he could spot and utilize. After a few weeks of experimenting with a range of programs in Stoneburner, he had a good handle on getting the Scout to do what he wanted through his own personal design. Excuse me. As he was opening Tamara's program, he ran across Immerman's cone again. Jerry had placed its text on the top of his Scout display to keep the riddle in the forefront of his mind, and I won't go into the details of the riddle, but it was something that Immerman said, who was Jerry's trainer, wanted an answer to, and that answer would tell Jerry both quite a lot about himself, and Immerman would learn quite a lot about Jerry also. Immerman did nothing casually, so there was a meaning behind the code. Of that, Jerry was certain. But he still couldn't reason out Immerman's intention, much less the answer to a riddle where passing the test would mean death, and the only way to survive was to fail. Jerry put it aside to concentrate on the task at hand, as he had done 100 times already. The artistic programming was ingenious. Jerry had expected it to be strictly art-focused, that is, only concentrating on the basics necessary to replicate or create new artworks, the way a painter might have nothing before her but her canvas, easel, paints, and brush. But Tamara, he started thinking of the program as a name rather than an acronym, was vastly broader. It appeared to be constructed around the same AI algorithms that Stoneburner had built in. Into that AI had been fed everything but the kitchen waste unit. Not just physical art and rendering subroutines, but music, literature, mathematics, plus hard sciences such as physics and chemistry. There were even storehouses for philosophy and religion. Many of them were tied together in unusual and unexpected ways. At one point, he stumbled across links interconnecting biology, anthropology, and classical poetry, which led a path to 20th century science fiction. It was as if the programmer, or the AI within the program itself, realized that art in a vacuum was sterile, but had to be fed with an entire life outside of the artwork in order to blossom. The more Jerry studied the Tamara program and mingled it with the knowledge and skills he had gained in Stoneburner, the more his idea blossomed. By midnight, he realized how he could steal the information about Project Dantean, the secret project, from Marx's computer. And, as with any confrontation with the Hound, Jerry decided the worst part was waiting, so he decided not to wait. He spent the wee morning hours customizing Tamara for the task, along with inputting a new set of passive Stoneburner commands into the fabric of his Scout's hardware. He paid for his lack of sleep the next day during the physical training sessions, which proved as intense for him as his trainees. Like Immerman, Jerry preferred staying close to his charges in order to share whatever suffering they were enduring and enjoy whatever enlightenment they snatched from their ordeals. He would almost forget they were gallows disciples, though he never let himself completely forget. But that night, when his portion of the training had ended, Jerry fought the urge to tend his bruises and sleep and made a beeline for Mark's. There was no tent for Mark's, but a log cabin just beyond the edge of the camp proper and near the old road winding across the mountaintops. It was luxurious by the standards Jerry had grown used to in the camp, but it was still simple and rough and symbolic, harkening back to the pioneers. The logs and roof tiles were real, not simulated wood, bearing the cracks of aging. It could have predated the Dayworld. Likewise, the stones in the foundation and the chimney were real stone. The only thing giving the cabin a modern appearance was the cement filling the spaces between the logs. 2 guards were posted at the cabin, one at the front door and one at the back. It was likely there were technological defenses too, buried in the simple appearing structure or made to appear as part of it. Jerry hadn't actively scanned the cabin since that would likely set off an alarm. It was unnecessary anyway, since Jerry didn't plan to enact any real mischief yet, but his Scout's passive sensors did detect a low amount of energy radiating off the structure, consistent with an outward energy projection of the sort of defense mechanism would use. This, despite Marx's protestation of how the gallows natural man needed no dependence on technology. But Jerry had the chip inside his skull to prove that Marx would not shun technology altogether. There were even the little hints, such as Marx's unfinished cigarette going into a stoning field to keep it from burning down. So Jerry approached cautiously and observantly, but he also made sure to approach with confidence. He was surprised to realize that in some measure he really did feel as confident as he played at appearing. He announced himself and the guard at the front door waved him through. There were only 2 rooms. The front door led to the larger, though it was large only in comparison with Jerry's tent. 10 broad paces would suffice to navigate its length. It was sparsely furnished, with the only non-basic item being Marx's desk at the back end. Marx looked up without surprise from the desk and his computer. The doctor was sitting facing the door with his back to the log wall. "Do you have something to say to me, Jerry?" Marx asked nonchalantly. "I have a great deal I wish to say to you, Dr. Marx," Jerry admitted, "but most of it can wait for another time. There are 2 things I want to say tonight in particular. Prioritizing is important and not a skill many master thoroughly, but one we do take pains to teach in our camps. Demonstrate for me how well you've learned this." Jerry offered Marx his Scout, which had Jerry's chosen text featured on its display. He said nothing as Marx closed his computer and then looked the Scout over. "This is the training regimen you've devised for those in your charge, I take it?" "Yes, Doctor. Campmaster Immerman has served as much of my template. I want to do for the trainees as he has done for us, training to think and observe, to use logic and solve puzzles, be they mental or physical, alongside strengthening our bodies. Campmaster Immerman has approved this overall, but I wondered if you had any further advice." Marx nodded and handed the Scout back to Jerry. "It is important for the physical training to come first. The body must be molded to its peak abilities. The mind will follow. In fact, be strengthened as the body is conditioned. And be more receptive to what you want to fill the mind with," Jerry thought. The physical training he knew from history was intended to break someone down and build them back up, make the body a soldier, which was to say, a weapon. A certain level of intelligence and initiative was required for a soldier to survive a dangerous situation. But beyond that, for more than just a few select people, too much intelligence and initiative could lead to overthinking orders, questioning them, and perhaps even disobeying. Marx fitted into this mold of what he wanted from his soldiers as much as any general from history. But a truly good military force was one which did not seek to stifle those who were the most intelligent, but rather place them where they would be the most useful, make them a part of the structure, deepen their investment in it. Sometimes politics and bureaucracy had interfered, but Jerry suspected this would not necessarily be an issue with the gallows. If Jerry could bend the ear of the dictator, he might get himself into a good position much more quickly. The mind will follow, Jerry agreed. And this is relevant to the second thing you wish to tell me? Marx asked. Marx would also, Jerry knew, be psychologically analyzing Jerry's every word, move, tone, and flinch as Jerry spoke. Yes, sir, since you took such pains to recruit me, and since, as you said, I gave you so much trouble in the process, I wanted to be forthright about where I stand with Galapagos. I appreciate forthrightness. What I am doing is not just for Galapagos or its goals. I am also doing this for myself. You were right about me. There were a great many resources within me I was unaware of and left untapped. Many I would have never even believed existed. I have gained strength and mental alacrity. I have gained confidence and a much better measure of my abilities. I like the person I have become, and I want to see how far I can go. Jerry wasn't sure for a moment how much Marx could read from his statement and body language, but all of his words had the advantage of being truthful. Jerry did like what he was learning about himself, what he was capable of doing, even if it meant capable of killing as a need for preservation. It had not been cold-blooded murder, and he would likewise defend Linda if the necessity arose. From a certain point of view, he was defending them both right now. Next, he hoped he was capable of carrying out the reductionist order to steal the Project Dantean file. What happened in the next moments would determine whether or not he got the chance to try. At last, Marx smiled faintly. You have reached a new level of understanding about what Galapagos is truly about, Jerry. The individual is as important as the goal in the long scheme of things. No individual ever won their rights or freedom by passively accepting what was given them or floating on the tide of circumstances. Fighting has always been the human condition, and you will need to be strong when we are ready to bring down the curtain on the new era. And when the body is strong, the mind will follow, Jerry said, and choose to follow Galapagos. Marx frowned. I do not intend to have slaves or slavish followers. Galapagos will be comprised of individuals serving a common cause. Slavishness posing as culture in the 13 principles is what created this doom for humanity in the first place. Jerry offered what he hoped, looked like a sincere nod, and my resourcefulness was lurking deep inside me all along, waiting to be brought out. Without thinking, Jerry asked, do you know Theodora Carson, Dr. Marx? Marx looked at him oddly, and Jerry wondered if he had overplayed his hand. Grandmother Dora may have been a spy, after all, and at this point, decades after her death, her true role within Galapagos might be well known. But if so, why go to so much trouble to recruit Jerry, even with his genetic profile? Revenge? Or could the reality be that she was actually a loyal follower of Galapagos after all? Finally, Marx said, I only knew your grandmother for a short time when I was young, but our time together was more than enough to realize she was remarkably self-aware, tapped deeply into the morphogenesis of her time. She knew how to fight. She will live on for generations. Now I must return to my work. Marx said no more than that, answering without answering. Instead, he opened his computer, let the biosensor scan his fingertips, and began attending to work Jerry could not see. Jerry felt pressing the matter would be a bad idea and saw himself out. Unbeknownst to Marx, Jerry hoped, however, the scout now possessed the key to getting into Marx's computer. Jerry was ready to spring just as soon as he could get close to the computer for a few moments. Yet he still felt like the student in Immerman's Cone who felt the dilemma of hanging over a cliff by nothing more than his teeth biting into a tree limb and opening his mouth to answer the riddle or any question posed to him, right answer or not, would be fatal. Jerry slept despite being wound up with anticipation, but he still did not dream. Right? Any questions? Well, Chris will bring us Ancient Opar.
You still have some time. I have a question for you. How did so you previously collaborated on a book, City Beyond Play,
right,
with Phil. How did this experience, so he was still with us, obviously, then how did this experience differ? What was the process of just, of assembling this book? Because you had a partial manuscript, right? So.
Well, the biggest thing was that I had to trust myself more than I did when I wrote The City Beyond Play, because when I was writing The City Beyond Play, I could still send him chapters as I wrote them, and to Betty, who was also reading them at the time, to see what he thought of them. And I actually did this just in time. It was only a few months after I finished The City Beyond Play that he had a major stroke. So if I'd waited a few more months to do it, and I had waited long enough already because I had to convince myself I was a good enough writer to do it in the first place. But if I'd waited a few more months, he wouldn't have been able to read it because the stroke affected both his brain and his eyesight. So he could only read a few lines on a page after that before the page would start swimming and his mental fog would take over. So this time around, I had to trust myself more, and there were indications in the manuscript where he was going with the book, ideas that would manifest later in the original series that he wrote. But then but doing it on my own, even feeling like I was hearing his voice in my head as I was typing, feeling like the time I spent writing this was time spent with him again, it still had to be just me. So, and nobody else actually saw the book until it was done. Mike Croteau and the other editors at Meteor House looked at it after I sent it to them. But up until that point, it was a completely solo effort to an extent.
So, so the manuscript was written, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we think that the manuscript was probably written before he wrote
Right.
Dayworld, Revelation, Dayworld Breakup.
So, yeah. I was just saying it was a first manuscript. It was likely the first manuscript. And it was a prequel in the fact that it took place about 5 subjective generations before the trilogy.
So that was obviously written probably more into the mid-early 70s.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, yeah. And so what was it like, what was your experience like syncing that up? Because obviously he was probably fleshing out ideas that later he changed when he, I think Dayworld came out in the early 80s, I believe. Did you have to change any details to sync them up with the continuity of the main Dayworld series, or?
Nothing major.
Yeah.
And because it was done earlier, the only thing I had to fix was that he says in the original trilogy that there have been no major changes in Dayworld for 5 generations. And this would take place 5 generations before. So I just had to make sure that everything that was referred to in the original trilogy, one way or another, whether it was just hints and references, passing references, or major events, were represented one way or another in here. Other than that, yeah, he laid out the groundwork, obviously being a master, pretty well to start with in this. So there were small things I had to change, and as I've mentioned in interviews before, even just small changes were painful because I hated changing anything of his. But I suspect that if he had published this himself, he would have made those changes himself in order to sync it up with the original trilogy.
I just wanted to say, I can hear Phil Farmer coming through that.
Good.
An awful lot of Farmerian things.
That was the biggest consideration I had when I was writing this, is that I wanted to make sure all of it sounded like him.
Very definitely. Very well done.
Thank you.
I also, we know that there was a trilogy that comes afterwards, but you might want to mention where this idea for the Dayworld originated.
Oh, you mean the short story?
Yeah.
He had, and I'm afraid I'm not going to completely remember the exact title, so I probably shouldn't say it.
I can't remember either.
But it was a short story. It was a very O. Henry-like short story in that the main character lived in one day, and he fell in love with a woman who lived in another day. So he wanted to apply to the government authorities to be able to move day so that he could be with her. And I won't tell you exactly what happens, although if you are familiar at all with O. Henry, you could probably guess without reading the story what happens to this poor fellow. But there's nothing in that story about daybreaking per se, in the respect that the main character is not a daybreaker. He just wants to be with this other lady. And from that seed came the entire trilogy, and then of course this. So it always amazes me sometimes when I've looked at the stories he wrote, how much he could pack into one. I mean, just a few thousand words, how many ideas, how much philosophy, how much depth of character could be packed into one small story. So much more than not any other, but most other authors that I've read. And obviously 4 books coming out of just a few thousand words. Win?
The sliced crosswise only on Tuesday World.
Thank you. Sure.
I believe in the introduction in the Grand Adventure to the Sliced Crosswise only on Tuesday World, he said that it came from a dream that he had. Am I correct that he had this dream of these like beehive-shaped dwellings, and there were like ants coming out, and it gave him the idea for the whole stoning process. I believe, like, I don't know if they were turning stone or something like that. But like, I think he often, like, his subconscious was always working, and like that. There's such a deep current in his writings of like the unconscious, I think.
Well, and he was so deeply interested in symbolism that, as much as supposedly a utopia the Dayworld was, and everybody being able to do what they wanted or thought they wanted, everybody was essentially part of a global ant colony in the original trilogy, hence the need for some people to daybreak and try to overturn the system, although not as violently as North Path Marks wants to in here.
Yeah, I remember, especially in Dayworld breakup, use ant symbolism for like the subversive organization or something. I just remember there.
Well, there's quite a lot of that in here too.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, a lot of it, there was 2 years, almost a 2-year hiatus between Mike Croteau asking me if I wanted to finish this book and being able to write it, and that was because of struggling to get the rights back from one of the original publishers. But that was a good thing, because in the portion that he wrote, it did take me a substantial part of that time to figure out a lot of what he was saying on the underlying levels, particularly the symbolism, because there's quite a lot in here. It was just, what he put in here was astounding. It was not exactly on every page, but it saturated the manuscript that he wrote. Anybody else? All right, now I'll give the stage to you, Chris.
All right. Try this without a microphone. If my voice starts lowering, please let me know.
Very
so,
clear.
Is this good?
Very clear.
Okay, great. I'm getting better over the years. I'm going to start out by reading a brief excerpt from Blood of Ancient Opar, which is the 5th volume in the Kokarsa or Ancient Opar series. And then I'm going to kind of barrel into an excerpt from the Song of Kwasin, which was the novel that I co-authored with Phil. That came out in 2012. But I wrote it earlier while Phil was still with us. Kind of hung up in publication there for a while. But I figured I'd read that because I'm going to be on the collaboration panel later today. So, Blood of Ancient Opar is a direct sequel to Hadon, King of Opar, the 4th volume. In fact, really, these two could be seen as one novel. So this picks up right from a sort of cliffhanger ending in Hadon, King of Opar. Just to briefly summarize that book, it takes place after the Great Cataclysm, which has destroyed the Kokarsan civilization, except for the city of Opar, where the hero Hadon is from the first 2 books. The city is invaded by a mysterious force. Turns out, I'm going to spoil that book for you a little bit. Turns out there was the city's oracle and the high priest of Rezu, the sun god, conspired together to invite this force in to try to oust Hadon and his wife, Lalila, who is the queen of Opar. Hadon is now king of Opar. His wife is the queen. So that whole cycle happens in Hadon, king of Opar. That force is defeated, although the oracle and the high priest are still in power. They had to actually ally with them in order to thwart the invading force, who turned on the people who basically hired them to come in and clear out Opar. So this picks up from the end. At the end, Hadon has a daughter named La. It's not Egeres Burroughs' La. This is the ancestor, ancient ancestor of La. And great things have been prophesied about her. And so at the end of Hadon and King of Opar, La takes Hadon down into the secret chamber beneath Opar, where they discover this mysterious statue of Sahindar, the god of time, down there. And if you've read the ancient Opar books, and if you've read Time's Last Gift, you'll know that there's something strange about Sahindar. There are hints that he may be a time traveler from the future. So I'll just begin here and read that. Chapter 1. Some gods speak from out of the heavens, or the seas, or the bowels of the earth. This god spoke from out of time. Hadon gazed upon the ancient symbols pressed into the gold tablet at the statue's base, the statue of Sahindar. In the flickering orange light of La's torch,
The hieroglyphs appeared to move. They may have been the ancestor ants of Hadon's totem, awakened from a stony sleep into which they had fallen in some dead age. Their dance across the tablet's surface, skittering first in one direction and then in another, seemed to tell a story in pantomime, a message addressed directly to Hadon from the son of Ko himself. The archer god cries out to you, Father, from across an abyss over 800 years in breadth. Hadon knelt to examine the tablet. The almost 15-foot-tall statue of the god of plants, bronze, and time loomed over him in the small, domed chamber. La lowered her torch beside the golden invocation, causing the dancing shadows to vanish and the antiquated pictographs to stand out in sharp relief. Though the logographic symbols dated to a time before the invention of Awanese's syllabary, Hadon had been taught to read them in his youth at the temple school. Haltingly, he translated the characters. O Hadon, son of Kumin in Phainath, husband of the witch from across the sea and father of La, she who would rule Opar if time itself is to remain unshattered. Hear my words in your heart as Lupoth, Queen of Golden Opar, has recorded them for your unborn eyes. Lupoth was the warrior priestess who founded the city of Opar 800 years prior. La now knelt beside him, looking from the rows of symbols in back of him as if she saw the characters reflected upon his face. The inscription was not long, but he had forgotten many of the symbols since he had first learned them. After a few minutes, he rose, shaken to the core of his being by the god's message. What does it all mean? He whispered. The chasm of darkness that awaits in action. A ship sailing backward on the river of eternity. The waiter without water and the unseen sentinel. Sacrifice to time itself. And why does the archer god warn me against invoking the ancient law? What law? The deities speak in riddles for reasons only known to themselves, La said. Only at the decisive moment is the veil lifted for us mortals. For now we must be satisfied with the fact that you have read the message that was meant for you, and I have read that which was intended for me. Now we must go. Throughout the course of Hadon, King of Opar, you get the sense that La knows something more than Hadon, and that she's hiding some great secret. Hadon looked at his daughter. Were those tears welling in his eyes? In her eyes? Sorry. He reached out for her, but already she was rising, making for the doorway that led from the domed room. He followed. When they were both outside, La whirled suddenly. Before he could stop her, she reached into the hole in the wall that concealed the door mechanism beside the entrance. She pulled hard upon something within. The world shook around them. Chapter 2. Hadon hurled himself at La, shoving her back from the doorway. They fell heavily against the hard cement. Stone debris flew at them from out of the chamber, or what had been the chamber. Hadon coughed in the dust-choked tunnel. La, what have you done? Though he was lying directly beside his daughter, he wasn't sure she had heard his question. A sharp ringing tolled in his own ears like a legion of brass bells. When at last La spoke, her words sounded as though they were muffled beneath the roar of a mighty cataract. I did what I must, Father. The prophecy must not fall into the wrong hands. La rose, wiping dust from her eyes, then winced as she cradled an arm. Are you injured? Hadon pushed himself up from the floor, examining his own head, neck, and limbs, but finding himself unharmed. La waved off his concern. A few scrapes, nothing more. Hadon recovered the torch from where it lay, burning amid the debris. The prophecy could be a deception. Sahindar is a trickster god after all. He is Rezu's son, whom Ko punished for stealing time from her. His words can't be trusted. I won't argue theology with you. La looked suddenly pained, and again Hadon thought he saw a mist of tears in her eyes. Just believe me when I say we have little time. La's words made Hadon uneasy. What was she holding back? He looked into his daughter's sea blue eyes, but in them saw only mystery. You would hide what you've learned down here, even from your father? For a moment, the girl looked like she would confess her secrets, but when she spoke, her words were mocking. I thought you didn't believe in the archer god's prophecy. By great Rezu's fiery tongues, I'm not your enemy, Law, I'm your father, you can tell me. Law smiled wanly at Hadon, looking up at him with an expression that might have been one of pity. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to anger you, but it's best for now that you don't know. He cursed his daughter's stubbornness, but finally he threw up his hands in defeat and smiled. You are a wiser one than I, Law, and I have to trust that you know what you're doing. Come. Law is somewhat of a child prodigy. She's very young, but seems much more older than her years. They headed back up the tunnel which they had accessed, by which they had accessed the chamber. As they climbed the steep, crumbling cement floor, Law spoke between panting breaths. The tablets in the hidden room, those addressed to me, were scribed by the demigoddess, not Rezu's son. Much of Lupoth's foretelling has already come to pass. She shook her father's hand and grasped it firmly. Know that had I not been captured, had I been able to read the tablets in time, I would have attempted to change the events they foretold. I'm not convinced that's possible, but even so, I would have tried. Hadon said nothing. Matters of prophecy and the deities were beyond him. Who was he, a simple fighting man, to try to understand such forces? And yet he knew all too well that prophecies were not to be taken lightly. Had not the Oracle of Kokarsa predicted great things for La should she be born in Golden Opar? Had not he risked all to fulfill that prophecy, battling the forces of King Minruth and overcoming countless hardships and near insurmountable trials as he traveled across the war-torn empire with his pregnant wife, La Lila, the Moon of Change? Had he not toppled King Gamori from the throne of Opar, just so La could one day ascend its ivory throne and so prevent the doom otherwise prophesied by the old crone Sugagnate? Though Hadon could not forget what he had read on the gold tablet in the secret chamber of Lupoth, La was right. Now was not the time to ponder the mystery. The gods would keep their secrets until they decided it was time for them to be revealed. At last, they left the suffocating tunnel behind and emerged in the altar room beneath the chamber of the moon. Gahese's corpse, that's the pirate king who was the antagonist in Hadon, King of Opar. Gahese's corpse lay still on the cold stone floor where Hadon had slain him. Hadon paused only long enough to recover the pirate king's kilt, wrap the garment around the man's decapitated head, and secure the bloody bundle with the dead man's belt. He would need proof that Gahese was dead to stamp out any spirit of resistance that remained in the hearts of the invaders. But even more importantly, Hadon wanted proof that he personally had killed Gahese. He would wave the grisly evidence before the eyes of those Oparian troops who had sided with Nephenes, a force that numbered some 2,500 men, roughly equal in size to the force loyal to himself. Perhaps he could make the sun worshippers see the error of their ways, win them over with proof of his heroic deed. What had Nephenes done for them anyway? Only brought them anguish by allowing the Mikawuru pirates to plunder the city and kill their brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers. Surely even the devotion to the sun god would not prove enough for them to maintain their allegiance to the treacherous high priest of Rezu. But then again, mortals were as fickle as the gods. That's all I'm going to read from that. To read more would be giving too many spoilers. So now I'm going to read a passage from the Song of Kwasin. This is kind of about maybe a quarter of the way through the book, maybe a little further. Kwasin is this kind of barbarian giant character, sort of an anti-hero. He is Hadon's cousin. He was exiled from the Empire of Kokarsa for ravishing a priestess of Ko. And he has now come back and found the empire is being torn apart by civil war. And he is in a position now where he's becoming king of Deathbase, the city where he is from. But he needs to, before he can lead the city, he needs to go visit the oracle who exiled him and seek forgiveness from him or a pardon from her. So he has traveled across this swampy area to this temple out in the middle of nowhere, and he's now at this temple and about to go see the oracle. And I picked this scene because Kwasin is a complex character. He's full of contradictions, and I thought this kind of captures why he is the way that he is. When the priestess woke him, the fire had burned nearly to its embers. Groggily, he arose and reached for his axe. "Leave your weapon behind." I'm going to try to pronounce the Carson words. Phil worked out the actual pronunciations for these, but Q's are pronounced like NG, which is really hard to do. But "leave your weapon behind," Ningwath said. Kwasin nodded to indicate the Carson denial. Where I go, the axe goes, he said. And besides, the voice of Ko at Kokarsa commanded Queen Aweneth herself to find the greatest hero in the land to retrieve the axe from the wildlands. I am that hero, and surely Deathbase oracular priestess will want to see my axe. He's somewhat of a braggart, too. Nainwath frowned. The queen chose the hero Hadon, the winner of the great games, to bring back the axe, along with the three said to be under the protection of Sahindar. The network of priestesses tells me that it was Hadon who found the weapon you now hold. But it was I who brought back the axe, Kwasin said in a rumbling voice that roused the men sleeping at his feet. My weakling cousin would never have succeeded in his quest if not for me. I would be foolish to tell lies in the temple of the oracle, who sees and knows all. Nainwath glared at him and said, "There is a reason, O king of Deathbase, that you were known throughout the lands as the ill-fated Kwasin. Now come, the oracle waits." He followed the woman through 2 prayer rooms and into a vast oval-shaped chamber with torches guttered high along the walls, like its counterpart in the temple at Deathbase, the same mosaic collage representing the chain of time since the creation of the world by Ko spiraled from the center of the chamber's floor. Kneeling on the brightly colored tiled floor, before an imposing marble and ivory statue of the Great Mother, crouched a white-shrouded figure. The being before Kwasin seemed to be painting a single blank tile at the end of one of the mosaic's spiral arms. Kwasin shivered. Though the figure's back was to him, it must be Wazamnuth, the oracular priestess, and with a brush and paint she was completing the artwork on the tile that many said would one day illustrate the last great event in Kokarsan history. What could it mean? The tile had remained blank for centuries. He tried to peer over and around the oracle, but could not quite manage to see the image she painted. Nainwath nudged him and whispered that they should take off their clothes. He did so, but he could not keep his eyes off the oracular priestess and her foreboding task. "Priestess, we have come," Nainwath announced. The old woman before them said nothing, but continued with her painting. After a minute later, she rose and hobbled, stoop-shouldered, behind the base of the towering statue of Ko. Kwasin looked at the tile, and though it remained only half-painted, he could see on it the image of what looked like the great tower of Ko and Rezu at Kokarsa. He stepped forward for a better look, but Nainwath held out an arm and pushed him back. The oracle returned, carrying a 3-legged oaken stool, which she positioned in front of the area where previously she had knelt, thus again obscuring the newly painted tile from view. "Leave us, Nainwath," the old woman said. "Warrior, leave your axe against the wall and come forward." Nainwath looked as if she wanted to object, but after making sure that Kwasin had propped his axe against the wall, she left the chamber. Kwasin stepped forward until he towered above the oracle on her stool. "Kneel, warrior, so that I may look into your eyes." Kwasin obeyed, and upon doing so noticed a narrow crevice in the tiled floor before the oracle's chair. From this hole rose thin wisps of bluish smoke, the aroma of which was heavy and sweet. The only time he had previously smelled its light was in the Temple of Ko at Deepbath, when old Wasamnuth had sentenced him to exile. The oracle smiled, revealing dark-stained teeth and several gaps where those which had rotted had obviously been pulled. The voice of Ko would much rather reside at the Temple of Deepbath, the woman said, but the quaking and shifting of the earth has extinguished the holy vapors there. Here the fires of Ko yet smolder, at least for now. Kwasin said nothing, but it unsettled him that the oracle had answered the question he had been pondering. Wasamnuth leaned forward and inhaled deeply the rising fumes. Her mysterious smile also unnerved him. Why, O oracle, have I been permitted to speak with you directly? Kwasin asked finally, for it was customary to have a priestess translate the oracle's holy utterances. Out of respect, Kwasin tried to speak in low tones, but found that his deep voice resounded like rolling thunder within the cavernous chamber. A dizziness had seized him, however, so he was not sure. Perhaps he only thundered in his own mind. His eyes had begun to peer from the smoke and felt queasy as the room seemed to contract to the size of a needle's eye and then expand into infinity. When Wasamnuth laughed, it was with the sound of a gargantuan web being plucked by the legs of some monstrous and hideously insane spider. You have long wondered, she said, why great Ko spared you from the sentence of death and instead sent you off into exile. I say to you, sometimes those who accomplish great deeds need be forged in the fires of trial and denial. What have you denied yourself, warrior? Again, the woman made her hair-raising cackle, and Kwasin had no idea how to respond. Then the oracle continued. It is said by some that you are cursed with two souls, one that rages and is possessed by death's spirit and produces only sorrow and destruction, the other that rejoices with great humor and love of adventure. Indeed, Hadon had volleyed such a taunt at him on more than one occasion. And Kwasin had always retorted by saying it was better to possess two souls than the half soul with which Hadon had been born. His cousin's jibe, however, now took on an air of truth, coming as it did from the lips of the oracle. Had Hadon somehow actually caught a glimpse of his soul, or souls? Is it true, Kwasin whispered, fighting off a tremor of fear that sought to shake through his great frame. Cold sweat dribbled from his forehead and onto his cheeks. Two souls may be forged together by fire, the oracle said, and now her eyes glazed as if the sacred trance had at last fully seized her. Look up and know how a soul is divided. Kwasin lifted his gaze to the statue of Ko, whose blank marble eyes seemed to look down on him in judgment. Then something long and thick and dark moved beneath the crook of Ko's arm. He gasped, and his heart raced as two tiny eyes glimmered redly in the torchlight. With a slow, malevolent grace, a cowled and thick-bodied serpent slithered from behind the statue and down its front. Do not move! The oracle's shrill voice stopped Kwasin as he rose to back away from the snake. Kneel, or Ko will strike you dead, but do so slowly if you wish to live. He almost found it impossible to obey. Though he held no fear of snakes beyond the usual caution, this serpent was different, for he had seen it many years before. But no, he thought, his eyes must deceive him. It could not be the same snake, but instead must be one of its kin. Still, fear constricted his throat, and his heart hammered a chaotic rhythm against his ribs. The oracle peered up at him with her watery, red-veined eyes as the snake glided along the floor and caressed her ankles. Kwasin resumed his kneeling position, but readied himself to jump up at the slightest indication of the snake's interest in him. Ask yourself, O black-hearted one, why you have been allowed to divide your soul. Why you have allowed this one to divide your soul. The old woman bent forward. The snake coiled itself around one of Wasamnuth's spindly arms and slid into her lap like an obedient pet. Kwasin found himself unable to speak. He had never told anyone the story of how one day, when 10 years old, he had brought home a long black serpent, such as the one the oracle now held before him in her lap. On that long-gone day, the young Kwasin's plaything had shot into a hole in the wall of his mother's house, and almost as quickly as it had gone from sight, the snake had vanished from the boy's mind. Kwasin had left home to spend the remainder of the day stealing fruit from the local shopkeepers, and when he had returned, it was to inhale the delightful aroma of his mother's cooking drifting from across the kitchen. A few moments later, Kwasin's mother had screamed, and his blood had run cold as he recalled his escaped pet. He had run into the kitchen to find his mother prone on the floor, the snake coiled and ready to strike. He had grabbed a heavy mallet used to soften meat, and with a single blow had crushed the serpent's head, immediately killing the creature, for even at that young age, Kwasin's muscles had been immensely strong. But looking at his mother's face, he had seen he was too late. Already a paleness had seized her, and she had cradled her arm where the snake had struck. With a kitchen knife, he had cut open her wound and sucked the venom from it as Puamku had taught him. But still his mother moaned softly and shivered, saying nothing. Kwasin, tears streaming down his cheek, had confessed to his mother how he had let the snake into the house, and that it was his fault the creature had struck her. Wamake had shushed her son, and, too weak to speak, had looked at him with her kind, forgiving eyes, and then passed quietly into dread Sisiskin's shadowy domain. Wazamnuth grinned malevolently at Kwasin, stroking a hand along the snake's sleek black body. As if drunk on Ko's sacred breath, the woman bobbed her head back and forth, and spittle ran down her chin in periodic gushes. Kwasin began to think the woman would never come out of her mind-numbing trance, when, after a long period of silence, she looked to the far wall against which Kwasin's axe lay propped and said, "The serpent and the axe will be your undoing, or your succor, and so shall it be for all the land." The woman slid off her stool, and the snake that had been in her lap slithered down her leg and onto the floor. Old Wazamnuth followed her familiar as it glided across the tiles. Then both woman and snake disappeared behind the base of the great statue. Kwasin was about to rise and leave the chamber, which now seemed to spin dizzyingly, when the oracle returned, bearing a large double-handled amphora made of fine black clay. The front side bore in somewhat crude bas-relief an image of what appeared to be Sahindar, his bow pulled wide, launching a forbidden arrow into the side of a fleeing antelope. Wazamnuth crawled on her three-legged stool and passed the vase to Kwasin from her shaky grip. "Drink, warrior," Wazamnuth hissed. Kwasin lifted the vase to his lips and swallowed a mouthful of what tasted like mead or extremely sweet millet beer. When he pruned his face at the bitter, faintly charcoal aftertaste, the oracle motioned for him to down more of the liquid. After 3 additional mouthfuls, he felt sick to his stomach and passed the amphora back to the woman. Kwasin looked at her questioningly. "I grow tired," she said, rising. "One day another may yet initiate you into these mysteries, but if that day comes and you dare forsake the goddess, you will endure much suffering and pass even more to your descendants. Go now!" Then Wazamnuth turned away from Kwasin and hobbled past the statue of Ko and into the darkness. "Oracle!" Kwasin cried after her. "Our business is not complete. I must at least know if I am free to lead Deathbaith against her enemies. Has my exile indeed been ended?" Wazamnuth stopped in the shadows and turned. The light from the torch caught her eyes, which glared back at him, demon-like. "You are free to lead the city of Kukako," she said, "but never shall your guilt be lifted. Never." The oracle turned and disappeared around the base of the statue. A moment later, Nainwath appeared at Kwasin's side. After Kwasin had risen and retrieved his clothing and axe, she led him from the chamber and asked him what he had learned of his fate. "All is well," Kwasin boomed with all the inflated ego he could feign. "I have been forgiven." Nainwath looked at him sideways, but said nothing. Beneath his stony exterior, Kwasin felt his 2 souls tremble. Any questions? That's all I have to read.
How much of, I'm sorry,
much of the series is Farmer's based on Farmer's Notes, and how much is Christopher Paul Carey?
The overall
Yeah.
series, so far he's had something to do with all of it. So obviously the Song of Kwasin was based on a partial manuscript by Phil and in a full outline, minus a little bit of ending, which I discussed with Phil about how he wanted to wrap it up. So all of the Song of Kwasin, I took everything and tried to be as faithful as I could to his outlines. Like, that is his story. There are a few additional things I had to add in, but the overall arc is all Phil. And as far as Hadon, King of Opar, and Blood of Ancient Opar, they are based on. There were two outlines to Flight to Opar, that we found in his notes anyway. And the second one we put in the new edition of Flight to Opar that Meteor House published, the restored edition. And I put that in there intentionally because it doesn't have spoilers for the future series. The earlier one, he was working out his ideas for the end of Flight to Opar. He needed to know how certain things worked in order to write the ending, how things would line up, because that would then affect the future series. So he sat down right in the middle of his outline, he stops and writes something like, future relationships in the series, and then he writes about a page of notes that details what would have come, basically the book that would have come after the Song of Kwasin. In another part of that same outline, he said what the title of that book would be, and it was Hadon, King of Opar. So that was Phil's title. So I took that, and obviously it was not as fleshed out as his Song of Kwasin outline, which was very detailed. But it was the arc of what he wanted to do in the next series, in the next book, and that even included hints of what would come after that. So Hadon, King of Opar, and Blood of Ancient Opar are based on that outline, this little bit of notes, some kind of a mini outline within an outline. Hadon, King of Opar is probably more me than Phil in terms of the overall plot, because it was a setup for the idea that he had in that kind of mini outline. Blood of Ancient Opar is very much a lot of the beats that you hit in that, and especially the climax, are from Phil's notes. So going forward, I have plans to at some point write what I'm calling the Foundation of Core trilogy, and this will be about Hadon's son. I know what he wants what Phil wanted Core to do. Core being Hadon's son, and then the city of Core from Age Rider Haggard's book She, and the She books. Obviously, Core, they're the same. The city was named after Hadon's son. So you can connect the dots there and see that where Hadon's son is going to go. So we have that, but anything written in the Foundation of Core trilogy is really going to have to be me, based on a lot of research into Age Rider Haggard. Any other
We
questions?
still have over 5 minutes, so
Okay.
keep the questions coming. Yeah.
How many books are you planning altogether besides?
So the Foundation of Core, cycle, whatever you want to call it, that will be 3 books. I haven't worked out whether that will be novels or more the novella size. And some of that will depend on working out an agreement with the estate and Phil's agent. They've been more prone to doing novellas, but we'll see if we can work something out to do something longer. So that's 3 there. I have an idea of writing a novella that would be about Hadon's daughter-in-law, and that would be based in the city of Opar. The Foundation of Core trilogy that we're going out of Opar. So I have that. there's other stuff that I could do, but and I have ideas for things, but like whether they get written or not, I don't know. You know, like I really liked Exiles of Ko, which was a prequel novella that I wrote, and that was about Lupoth, the founder of Opar. It would be kind of nice to do a little trilogy, to do 2 more, and then have that be its own little cycle. So that's pretty much all that's floating around in my mind right now. But there have been no contracts signed on any of this. So. Other questions?
You're like the world's expert on Carson and that civilization. I was always curious because this all happens in the midst of Africa.
Yeah.
But these characters they're not really black Africans. They're more, white European types. How do they fit in ethnically? Because I know Phil is a completist.
Yeah, they're not necessarily all. Can I sit on this one?
You can stand on it.
They're not necessarily all white European too, because Phil said that there were multiple co-Carson ethnicities, and one ethnicity was descended from the Ainu of Japan, the Proto-Ainu of Japan, so from Siberia, and it's kind of like as if instead of going over the land bridge to North America, they went the other way and then came down through Africa. So that's why there's sort of almost a Native American feel to some of the co-Carson civilization, and especially in terms of the linguistics, because he based some of the linguistics on like the Algonquin language family. So it's not 100% correct to say that it's all white Europeans. Now I do think that he intended that some Europeans did come down and then they mixed in when they got down in Africa, to Central Africa. So, and there's also the Neanderthals, and there was interbreeding with Neanderthals too. In fact, the frightful men of Opar, in Phil's view, were Neanderthals, the inhabitants, and they he calls them the Go-Ka-Ko, and they play a role in both Exiles of Ko, and they're the native inhabitants of the region. And when the co-Carsons came down in Lupoth's time, they met them. Lupoth met them, formed a relationship with them, and she had the foresight to see that once the co-Carsons established a colony there, that the native Go-Ka-Ko would probably become enslaved. And she tried to prevent it during her lifetime, and she lived to be an old woman and kept her word on that mark. In my mind anyway, I haven't written that part, but and it shows up again in her prophet, what she believed came true, and they did become a slave population in Opar, and that really comes to bloom in Blood of Ancient Opar, and it's addressed head on in the plot about that and the conflicts with having a slave population and what that means for their society and all.
In a way, Phil was very prescient because we now know that there was interbreeding between Neanderthals.
Yeah.
And I think which he had talked about that in the Alley God and another story.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I just out of curiosity, in the Tarzan stories, the Opar civilization had these rather beautiful women and these rather ugly men.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the ugly men may represent the Y chromosomes from the Neanderthals, because that's the only thing that would be passed to the men that wouldn't be passed to the women.
Yeah, and that's what the series was largely inspired by the Edgar Rice Burroughs fans, Frank Breckel and John Harwood, who wrote an article called Heritage of the Flaming God. And in that, they actually proposed the whole Y chromosome idea of why you would have the different sexes looking so divergent. One of them expressing the Neanderthal genes, and then the other one is, more human and beautiful women. Great.
So this takes place in basically Tarzan's world, prehistoric times. Where's the Mangani? Are they going to make any sort of appearance whatsoever?
There are references that in the original books, and even in the ones that I continued, to the new car. the long-armed hairy men of the trees, they are the Mangani, basically analogs in the Ancient Opar series. And it's interesting that in, I believe it's memoirs, extracts from the memoirs of Lord Greystoke, and is it in Feast Unknown too? I'm blanking on it, but the Mangani equivalent in that are called the N''K. New car. He just took because he said in that the Mangani they had a consonant language, they didn't use vowels. So the new in the car, the oo and the ah got removed, and so when it got translated to the coauthored, they filled the syllables in, and so that was his connection there. He had it all connected. Yeah.
What?
Oh, go ahead.
I tell you what, one of the other things, in the Mangani language, there is no word for chimpanzee, which I found to be very strange. I wonder if the Mangani themselves were chimpanzee, whether they would be kept under that term as opposed to the Mangani.
There's a species of related to chimpanzees. What are they called?
Bonobos.
Yeah.
There's also a giant chimpanzee population they only discovered about 10 years ago somewhere, which are more the size of gorillas than they are chimps. So I've often wondered if that might be if chimpanzees would be covered under the Mangani term.
Yeah.
Just as a generic term.
Maybe.
Because they're close with us. But
Yeah.
I've often wondered about that.
Yeah, I like the fact that in the new Tarzan movie, Legend of Tarzan, that the Mangani were not, they specifically call out that they were not gorillas, which was great. That was true to burros.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Just off the top, just for record, I remember reading that article you were talking about, what they talking about, and any farmer basically asks Lord Greystoke or the carrot, why don't you have anything like cheetah? Where's your chimpanzee? Well, we ate chimpanzees when we could catch them.
Oh, yeah. So it's probably time for Win now? Or are we
If there's
out of
one
time?
last question. Or?
Great. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
So, collaborating with Philip José Farmer and co-writing a novel or a short story with Phil based on his partial manuscripts or his outlines, depending on the property or depending on the series, it is Phil Farmer after all. Sometimes that can be kind of problematic if you want to then come and do a reading in public from that work. As many of you may know, Phil in some of this series would become very graphic in terms of his depictions of sex and or violence. Particularly, you had just mentioned A Feast Unknown, Chris, and that book has a certain reputation for hypersex and hyperviolence. The Evil in Pemberely House was the first Patricia Wildman book, and he actually wrote, I won't tell you how many chapters, but he wrote several chapters and then a complete outline. And that book was one that he wrote in the period in which he was really being sort of very visceral and graphic in terms of his incorporation of sex as a theme into the plot of books and depictions. And so I wanted to read from a chapter that was purely Phil from this book, kind of before I took over the writing and we kind of did that transition. And I just found myself unable to do it. And while I certainly had no problem writing the rest of the book and honoring his wishes and the scenes, I decided it's a little problematic to actually read from that. So what I decided to do was to read my new foreword to the 2014 edition. The book first came out in 2009, and in the intervening 5 years, it received some interesting feedback, some of it not necessarily fact-based, and so I decided that it might be interesting to read from my foreword, and then I'll move on to one of my own works. So this is the foreword to the 2014 edition of The Evil in Pemberely House. I first met, I being me, I first met Lady Patricia Clark Lupin Wildman, Duchess of Greystoke, in the summer of 2009 after the manuscript for The Evil in Pemberely House was finalized and submitted to the publisher, but before the first edition hardcover appeared in print from Subterranean Press. The substance of that brief but pleasant encounter has been recounted in my foreword to The Scarlet Jaguar, Volume 2 of the memoirs of Pat Wildman, published by Meteor House in 2013. With the exception that she spent no little time quizzing me regarding the accuracy of the Pemberely House manuscript. Not one to put on airs, Lady Patricia cared little that the novel delved into the inner workings of her psyche, or at least her psychosexual state as a teenager and young adult, shocking to some though they might be. In psychoanalytical terms, her condition has been described as the Electra complex. In fact, she insisted upon full accuracy. Similarly, she had no compunctions about the detail with which her sexual encounters were depicted and the revelations regarding her sexual orientation. She insisted that these were germane to the faithful telling of the tale. Lady Patricia had related the disturbing events to Philip José Farmer via a series of correspondence in 1973, knowing of his reputation for dealing with taboo sexual matters honestly and frankly, and she fully expected him to capture the truthful essence of the events in his novelization of them. That the novel had never been completed by Mr. Farmer and would now appear under our joint byline worried Lady Patricia. She admonished me that the tale should be related exactly as it happened, with nothing held back out of hypocritical regard for decorum or propriety. I reassured her that Phil had had full oversight of the project ever since I had discovered the partial manuscript, notes, and outline in his basement in July 2005. The following year, Phil and Betty Farmer had authorized me to complete the novel, subject to their approval of chapters in progress, and to my faithful adherence to his outline. The next summer, during an annual visit to Peoria, Illinois, to visit Phil and Betty, we all had a frank conversation regarding the explicit sex scenes in the manuscript. Phil had advocated for retaining the scenes as integral to the tale and not gratuitous. Given that our plan called for preserving all of Phil's already written prose, unaltered, and that this prose included some of the mature content, as well as his opinion regarding the necessity of this material to the reader's understanding of the overall story, the decision was made to retain the sex scenes as he wrote them, as well as the ones described in his outline of the remainder of the novel. As farmer expert Christopher Paul Carey, who was also present for this uncomfortable conversation, has said, "I'll never forget the palpable tension in the room." Thus reassured that the manuscript retained fidelity to the events as they happened, Lady Patricia said she was looking forward to the printed book, which was due to be published in just a few months, and our conversation turned to the possibility of me recounting her further adventures, a prospect to which I happily agreed. Lady Patricia also confirmed, as I suspected and some others have guessed, that she was the anonymous benefactor noted in the acknowledgments of this book, who in late 2006 sent me a photocopy of the exceedingly rare The Shades of Pemberley from the January 1928 issue of the Saxon Blake Library. This also confirmed her ongoing contact with Phil Farmer, and that he had informed her of my involvement in the Pemberely House manuscript very early on. Before parting, I did pose a final question which, while perhaps trivial in the overall scheme of things, had been an itch that had needed scratching for quite some time. Why, if the family surname was Clark Wildman, despite the lack of a hyphen between Clark and Wildman, had her parents called her Patricia Clark Lupin Wildman? Lady Patricia's grin was dazzling. Her mother had insisted British naming conventions be damned. Her father was American, her mother was French, and they named their daughter any way they, or she, damn well pleased. Doc Wildman, of course, had acquiesced to his lovely and strong-willed wife, as he had in many matters, a fact which engendered in young Patricia Wildman no little jealousy of her mother, as will be seen as you read on. So I'm going to read next from my new chapbook. It's got a rather long title, Being an Account of the Delay at Green River, Wyoming of Phileas Fogg, World Traveler, or The Masked Man Meets an English Gentleman. The story takes place in December 1875, right in the midst of Phileas Fogg's 80-day round-the-world trip. And in fact, it takes place in the final stages of that trip as Phileas Fogg and Aouda, who went on to become his wife, and his manservant Passepartout are traveling across the continental United States on the Transcontinental Railroad. It takes place in December, and it actually adheres very closely to Jules Verne's timeline. Or, should I say, I've done a rather exhaustive investigation and kind of mapping out the chronology of the timeline as Jules Verne documented it in Around the World in 80 Days. And I came to find that there were actually some discrepancies or there was some lack of clarity in that timeline. And by my reading of the timeline, there's actually potentially an extra 24-hour period in the timeline which is undocumented. And I'm not going to bore you by reading my analysis, but I have the analysis here at the end of the chapbook. And I think I make a pretty good case for about an 18 to 24-hour window in which an untold adventure could occur. And this would be after the departure of Phileas Fogg from Salt Lake City, between Salt Lake and Lincoln, Nebraska. And Jules Verne does note that a short stop was made at Green River, Wyoming. My thesis, or my hypothesis, is that the stop was actually longer, that Monsieur Verne altered the events due to the influence of one of the characters who actually appears, and perhaps discretion was the better part of valor on Verne's part to omit the details from the final book. Nonetheless, they've been uncovered by me, and so I will share with you Phileas Fogg's encounter with the masked hero of the plains. Before I start, and I'll probably drop a couple, I'll make a couple of side comments as I'm reading. I'm just going to read until I'm out of time, which is probably about 4 o'clock or 4 or 5. So the Lone Ranger. As many of you probably know, the Lone Ranger's true name was John Reed. He was a Texas Ranger. His brother and many other Texas Rangers were killed in an ambush, and then he went on to become the Lone Ranger. John Reed had a great nephew. Great nephew's name was Britt Reed, and Britt Reed was the masked hero, or the masked vigilante, the Green Hornet, in the 1930s and the 1940s. That becomes interesting because in the film The Lone Ranger and the Lost City of Gold, 1958, Clayton Moore and Jay Silverheels, the Lone Ranger doesn't always appear in his white hat and his mask and his sort of traditional Lone Ranger suit. He goes undercover and he adopts other identities. And one of the identities that he adopts is of a bounty hunter from Louisiana named Brett Reagan, maybe Brett Regan. Brett Regan, Britt Reed. I don't know if that was purposeful, if it's some kind of amazing, fanciful coincidence, but that definitely caught my ear. And so here we start with December 2nd, 1872, in Oakland, California. Britt? The girl asked, slurring a bit. What an odd name. No, ma'am, the man replied. His words came out in a lazy southern drawl. It's Brett. Britt? He smiled patiently at her and smoothed down the reddish whiskers of his Van Dyke beard. Brett, ma'am. Brett Regan. She giggled and put a hand on his knee. She leaned in close, and her whiskey-soaked breath came at him in great waves. That's a funny accent, Brett. Where are you from, anyway? Louisiana, ma'am. He set his glass on the bar, untouched, and looked into her bloodshot eyes. Well, Brett, Oakland Long Wharf's a long way from home, ain't it? I hope you can help me, ma'am. The girl gaped again and waved a strand of stringy blonde hair out of her eyes. I'm sure I can, Brett, but you gotta stop calling me ma'am. I'm Josie. Her hand moved up his thigh. Josie, I'm looking for someone. You done found her, Brett. She put her lips near his ear and whispered, it's just $2. Well, Josie, you see. Now, Mr. Brett, I don't just do it for dog cheap. But that's not really why I came. Josie backed away and raised her voice. Well, why the hell else do you come down to the Devil's Edition except to come? What's the matter? You don't like old Josie? I ain't even 30 yet. Some of the other patrons of the Casa del Gato turned from their drinks or card games and stared. The bartender shot a glare their way. This wasn't exactly going as Brett had planned. Now, Josie darling, that's not what I meant. Not what I meant at all, he said. Listen, the fellow I'm looking for owes me some dinero. Soon as I find him, well, you and me. Josie smiled and quieted down. She took another gulp of the whiskey he'd bought her and put a hand back on his knee. I get you now, Brett. What's this feller look like? He got here maybe a couple of hours ago, Brett said. Tall, lanky, dark hair, has a white scar on his cheek that he tries to hide under a scraggly beard. Yeah, I seen him. In fact, he's upstairs with Lorraine right now. Brett glanced at the rickety stairway. You know which room? Well now, she said, I'll get in trouble if I tell you and you just go bursting in there. Can't you wait till he's done? He smiled at her. Josie, if I wait and he ducks out the back way and I don't get my dinero, well, then you and me. Josie frowned. Well, I ain't sure. A woman's piercing scream from the upper floor interrupted Josie's protests. That's Lorraine, she yelled, but Brett Regan was already halfway up the stairs, 6-gun drawn. He stopped at the top landing and darted a quick look around the corner. The red-carpeted hallway was empty, though a few slightly creaked open doors showed anxious eyes peering out. Lorraine's screams continued, emanating from one wide-open doorway, the third down on the right. Reagan heard the stomp of feet on the hickory wood stairs behind him. He shot once into the air. Get back in your room, folks. Nothing to see here. As one, the quarter-open doors in the hallway slammed shut. He pulled the trigger again and yelled back down the staircase. Crossfire! Stay down! The clomping on the stairs halted. Reagan slipped forward a few feet, 6-gun at the ready. Nothing stirred in the hall. Lorraine's cries continued, morphing into sobs. He dared a quick glance behind him. Nothing. The followers on the staircase continued to lay low for now. Brett Regan tore the false mustache and beard away from his face and stuffed them in his pocket. He shucked his white topcoat, reversed it so that the black lining now faced out, and slipped it back on. He doffed his white hat, tied a black mask tightly around his eyes, and pulled the hat back on his head. The Lone Ranger shot twice more into the ceiling and made some noises suggesting the danger still existed in order to continue to deter any brave souls from downstairs. He kicked in the cheap, flimsy door and dashed into Lorraine's room, both guns drawn, intent on preventing his quarry from striking again. A quick glance at the girl, Lorraine, revealed her huddled in a corner on the cold wood floor, sobbing in horror, covered only with a shabby blanket. She appeared unharmed, or relatively so. Not so the Lone Ranger's quarry. Dave Daffy hung by his wrists from a rafter in the ceiling. A blood-red length of cloth, like a scarf, was knotted tightly around his bruised throat. A dark tongue lolled from a slack mouth. Daffy's eyes bulged, a look of stark horror forever etched on his features. His feet were bare, boots tossed in the corner. He was shirtless. Small red welts covered his chest and feet. The tips of his fingers and his toes were bloody ruins, the nails ripped off. He had been tortured before he'd been strangled. The ranger took all this in within seconds. He closed the door, turned the key, locking it, and shoved a chair under the knob. He hunched down next to the sobbing girl and examined her. His first impression was correct. She was unharmed. Physically unharmed, anyway. Lorraine. She looked up, as if seeing him for the first time. At the sight of the mask, her mouth opened to give forth another barrage of screams. He clamped a hand over her mouth and then shifted to hold a finger to her lips. Lorraine, I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. Please don't scream. Nod if you understand. The girl nodded and he released her. It's okay, the ranger said, soothing her. I need you to answer some questions. Can you do that? Lorraine nodded again and wiped the tears from her cheeks. She was pretty, dark-haired, and probably only 18 or 19. He felt sorry that her life had come to this and at such a young age. How many were there, he asked. 3, she answered quietly. What did they look like? They were like those foreigners, those men who built the railroad and work at the docks. You mean Chinese? Yeah, Chinamen. Long black hair braided in the back and big flowy shirts and pants. Did they all look like that, the ranger asked? The one in charge, he held a knife to my neck while the others... Lorraine gestured at the hanging body. He was bald, had a funny little yellow hat. He spoke real quiet like he was whispering, but he wasn't really. What did he say? He was real apologetic. Said he was real sorry and that as long as I was quiet, I wouldn't get hurt. Said that the railroad was built on the backs of the Chinese, and now they were dying in the coal mines, and it was gonna end. He and his gang were gonna end it. His gang? He had a funny name for it, but it seemed like it was a gang. Called it a tongue or something like that. A tong? Yeah, that's it, tong. Think hard, Lorraine, the ranger said. Did this tong have a name? I don't have to think too hard, mister, Lorraine said. He looked at me with those eyes and I almost felt like I was dreaming. He said to tell whoever came asking that it was the Sublime Order of the White Peacock. Don't even know what that means, but it don't sound very scary. He made me repeat it to make sure I got it right. Okay, how did they get away? The head guy, like I said, he said they wouldn't hurt me if I did what they said. If I didn't, it'd be worse than that guy hanging there. Go on, he prodded. So, he said I had to wait 5 minutes after they left before I could start screaming. He said he knew I was going to scream, but I had to wait 5 minutes, or else if I didn't, he would come back and find me and string me up like that guy there and slice off my eyelids and shove burning wood slivers under my fingernails and other stuff I don't want to talk about. So, you stayed quiet. Damn right, mister. I understand, the ranger said. You did the right thing. Is there anything else you can think of? Lorraine said no, then grabbed the ranger's wrist and looked at him hard. Just that he said the coal mines were going up in flames, starting with the one that there dead man came from. And mister, that peacock stuff don't sound too scary, like I said. But the Chinaman scared the dickens out of me, and when he said that stuff was at the coal mines burning, his own eyes were afire. They were blazing green. December 3rd, 1872, addressed to Sheriff C. Carey, Green River, Wyoming. Daffy dead, stop. Chinese Tong plans Green River coal mine sabotage retaliation, stop. Warren Mayor Detcher, stop. Arriving train December 6th in Form T, stop. Alan King, en route to Green River, care of the conductor, Central Pacific, Train 94, Oakland, California. By the way, Alan King is another alias that the Lone Ranger would use, and actually was said to be the Lone Ranger's name in the late 1930s serial, as opposed to John Reed. So that kind of explains that. December 4th. Regan entered the crowded dining car and took a long look. The train, rattling along the steel rails, had just departed Reno, Nevada. He noted an empty chair at a table for 4 and made his way down the narrow aisle. Please pardon the intrusion, he said in a slight southern drawl. He tipped his hat respectfully. There don't appear to be many seats. May I join you? The 3 passengers sat stock still, staring at him, and a palpable air of tension arose. Then one of them, whom Regan estimated to be about 40, stood and bowed slightly. He wore a dark suit of a European cut and a top hat. He nodded without smiling and indicated the vacant seat with a gloved hand. I am Phileas Fogg of Savile Row, London. Please do join us. Brett Regan, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at your service, sir. The 2 shook hands and Regan took the seat next to Fogg. Across from them sat another man and a woman. She was introduced as Aouda, a Parsee who had joined Fogg's party while they had traveled through the Bundelkund region of India. She was darkly beautiful, with coal black hair, wide eyes, and smooth skin with the faintest hint of olive. Regan tipped his hat again and gave a friendly smile. "Charmed, ma'am." Aouda nodded gravely at Regan, but said nothing. "And this," Fogg said, "is my manservant, Passepartout." Passepartout looked to be about 30. He wore a brown suit and a matching bowler hat, which was affixed firmly atop a round, somewhat cherubic face. He smiled openly at Regan, and the two shook hands across the table. "Pleased to meet you, monsieur. Are you a real American cowboy?" Brett Regan chuckled and shook his head. "No, Passepartout, not a cowboy by any stretch." He turned to Fogg. "But tell me, sir, what brings you all the way from London to Nevada, by way of India?" "My master has made a bet that he can circumnavigate the entire globe in 80 days or less," Passepartout exclaimed. "He stands to lose an enormous sum if he fails to do so." "Passepartout, that will be quite enough," Fogg said. The manservant's comically abashed expression made Regan grin. "But," Regan said, "what Passepartout says is accurate? That's absolutely fascinating, sir. And Miss Aouda here joined your expedition as you traveled through India?" "Mr. Fogg is a wonderful man," Aouda spoke for the first time. "He rescued me from a horrible fate." Regan could plainly see that the girl felt not only gratitude for the Englishman, she was clearly in love with him. "Sir, if I may," Regan said to Fogg, "you and your party looked quite wary, perhaps even tense, when I asked to join you. Nonetheless, you have extended to me the hospitality of your table. For that, I thank you. If you care to share what's troubling you, I'm at your service." Fogg looked at Regan for a long while, as if taking the American's measure, and then nodded at Passepartout, who was clearly bursting to tell the tale. "It was on the Oakland ferry that one of your countrymen made insulting remarks concerning my master's homeland," he began. "Monsieur Fogg, naturally, took exception to this, and the upshot is that this American, a Colonel Proctor, caused us to be late and made several threatening remarks. Facing a wait of several hours, we returned to San Francisco and checked at the British consulate, where they referred us to a gunfighter who resides at the Hotel Carlton. Finally, with SS Scored in place, we made our way to Reno. The colonel's brother, Major Proctor, and 2 henchmen dogged our heels all the way to Reno. He continually tried to goad Monsieur Fogg into fighting him. Our guide believed that Major Proctor was motivated more by the money in Monsieur Fogg's carpetbag than by his brother's honor." Fogg shot a dark look at Passepartout at this comment, and Regan was sure the Englishman would have stern words for his valet later. The Frenchman, oblivious, glibly continued. "Anyway, just outside of Reno, the Major finally got us alone and challenged Monsieur Fogg to a duel, in the course of which the man in black—" "Man in black?" Regan asked. "Yes, monsieur, our guide." "Ah," Regan said. He had heard of this man. He waved Passepartout to continue. "Well, monsieur, the man in black was forced to shoot Major Proctor." "I see," Regan said, "and you're worried the colonel may come after you." "There's been no sign of Colonel Proctor on the trail," Fogg said. "There's really no cause for concern." "But if Colonel Proctor were to make trouble, Mr. Fogg," Regan said, "it could cause you further delay." "Not to mention bodily harm, monsieur," Passepartout said. "I thank you for your concern," Fogg said, "but I am confident we will arrive in New York on December 11th with time to spare to catch our steamer." Passepartout extracted an oversized watch with esoteric markings on the cover from a vest pocket. He made a great show of consulting it. "As of this moment, monsieur, we are exactly on schedule, just as my master has foreseen," he said with pride. So a little bit of background there. There was an episode of a Western television show called Have Gun, Will Travel, in which the man in black, the gunfighter for hire, Paladin, worked out of the Hotel Carlton in San Francisco and essentially helped people in need for hire. This particular episode was actually a crossover with Phileas Fogg that also took place during Fogg's journey. So, interestingly, the television episode refers to Major Proctor. The book refers to Colonel Proctor. And so I have attempted to reconcile the two here by mentioning the Colonel and the Major who was actually killed in the episode of the television show and explain how the colonel was still after Phileas Fogg. By the way, it's available on YouTube somewhere if you care to look that up.
What was the title?
Fog Bound. Fog Bound. Actually, it just looks like we're just about at time. So I am going to just read a very short excerpt to wrap it up. So this is actually near the end. Fogg and the Lone Ranger, Mr. Regan, are in Green River, Wyoming. Things have come to a relatively satisfactory conclusion regarding the suffering Chinese coal miners in that town after some adventure and some drama and some shooting and some fisticuffs. At last, as the last of the Chinese miners and their families made their way out of the caverns and up into the brisk but fresh winter's air, a sibilant, almost hissing voice called out from behind the masked man and the Englishman. Mr. Regan, Mr. Fogg. Startled, the two men turned. Two green eyes burned and danced in the inky depths of the cavern, like emerald fireflies or angry hornets. Below the eyes, a grate slid open on a dark lantern, and a slice of kerosene-fed light illuminated the face in which the jade eyes were set. The face was that of a Chinese man in his early 30s, handsomely satanic. His head was shaved, and he wore a yellow skull cap. His black robes were of silk and prominently embroidered with a stylized white peacock, surrounded by smaller dragons and other arcane symbols. I am Shan Ming Fu. The Lone Ranger nodded. The head of the Sublime Order of the White Peacock. The very same, the Tong leader replied. You have thwarted my attempts to bring about change in Green River, and indeed to change the lot of my people in this country. I have also done my best to help your people, the ranger said, at least on a small scale in this tiny town. And my methods involve less loss of life or limb than yours. Shan Ming Fu nodded. You have earned my respect. Grudgingly, but you have earned it. But you have administered a setback to me. You can provide compensation which will make me whole. What setback? The masked man asked. The reputation of being the only Mandarin willing to take on the guailo of this country for the sake of ordinary Chinese workers would be a great foundation for the growth and expansion of my order. I would have gained great prestige among the immigrants and their families. And what is it you wish? Nothing of import. It is a matter of honor which can be satisfied with a small token. Which is? Shan Ming Fu gestured to Phileas Fogg. This man's servant carries a watch. It is an ornament of great beauty. Give it to me, and you shall hear of me no more. Absolutely out of the question, Fogg said with his usual calm. The Tong leader turned his blazing green eyes upon the Englishman. It is only out of regard for our shared paternity that I do not strike you down where you stand. I have no idea what you're talking about. For the first time, Fogg's characteristic composure was shaken. Sir, the Lone Ranger interrupted, you have suffered no harm which requires compensation. You show to the immigrant Chinese workers your willingness to help them. The enemies are dead. Your prestige remains intact, and in fact will only grow due to the events here, which you helped shape. Shan Ming Fu turned back to the masked man. The unblinking green eyes burned, but there was an inhuman coldness behind them. He nodded. I am outmaneuvered. My respect for you is well placed. I shall follow your progress, and that of your descendants and their descendants. I expect great things. There was a burst of green flame which temporarily blinded the ranger and Fogg. When their eyesight cleared, Shan Ming Fu was gone. Fogg turned to the ranger. Mr. Regan? he asked quizzically. The masked man gave a slight smile. The very same.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
And I was, want to take any questions?
Yeah,
or-
I'll take questions if anyone has any about Farmer or collaborating with Farmer. Meteor House, the same as the other Farmer books. But it's actually not a licensed Farmer because it doesn't invoke any of Farmer's characters. Throwing some subtle hints there, but I'm actually not using Farmer's concepts.
Any more adventures of Patricia Wildman coming out?
There are, but probably not for about 2 years or so. Right now, I'm writing an Avenger novel, Richard Henry Benson, for Moonstone, and I need to kind of wrap that up by the end of the year and close the loop on that, and then I'm going to spend all of the year 2017 writing The Monster on Hold, which is the 4th book in the Lord Greneth Doc Caliban cycle. Phil Farmer had written a good deal of words for that, and he actually introduced those words at the World Fantasy Convention in 1983. And so we have that prose existing, and we've actually found additional prose, which I'll be working into the text of the novel from his files. And then I'll be outlining that and writing the novel in 2017 for summer 2018 release. And so after that, then I'll come back to Patricia.
So did I hear, I didn't get to hear all of it, but did I hear you just attach Paladin to Old Newton? Has that been done before?
Sort of. I mean, so there was a Have Gun Will Travel episode that was a Fogg crossover, and so but there were some discontinuities between that and Verne's book, so I resolved those and made a reference to Paladin hopefully without violating. Copyright. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Well, the dealer's